Hello, everyone. I'm Jill Allen, the Alberta Craft Council Exhibitions and Membership Coordinator, and I'd like to welcome you this evening. I'm so glad you could join us for a wonderful talk, a Monday meetup with Lael Chmelyk about her current exhibition in the Discovery Gallery here in Edmonton called Haptic Rituals. Lael, thanks so much for joining us. And it's great to see everyone else here too. Before Lael begins her presentation, I'd like to start with acknowledging that Alberta is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. Those of us joining from Alberta are on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6, 7, and 8 territories, and all of us are beneficiaries of these peace and friendship treaties. The Alberta Craft Council is dedicated to ensuring that the spirit of these treaties is honored and respected. We hope that as individuals, you join us in committing to learning, listening, reflecting, and taking actionable steps in truth and reconciliation, and by celebrating and supporting the creativity of Indigenous craftspeople. So, as I've said before, I'm Jill Allen, the Exhibitions and Membership Coordinator. I'd like to introduce you all to Lael Chmelyk, a multidisciplinary artist living in Calgary. She earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts with distinction in ceramics from the Alberta University of the Arts in 2020. Her work explores craft histories of quilting as well as soda-fired ceramics to explore ritual, domesticity, as well as our agency over our bodies. She is joining this evening to talk about her work and her exhibition, Haptic Rituals, in the Discovery Gallery, Edmonton, until June 24th. So Lael, if you wouldn't mind,
Hi.
Get away.
Perfect. All right. Are we ready to go?
I believe so.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity to do the show. I'm really excited. I am going to share my screen here. All right. Thank you all for coming. My name is Lael, and I'm really excited to do this talk with you. In terms of what I have planned, what I'd like to do is just chat a little bit about sort of where I started and how my earlier work has threads sort of moving in towards the work in the exhibition. I grew up in Dawson Creek, BC, which is in northern British Columbia, and my childhood was this very sort of wonderful bucolic experience where I spent a lot of time outside in nature, in the yard, in the forest. And my father was a forester, and so I had a lot of exposure to plants, identifying plants, which led me to become really interested in botanical illustration and things that really made me consider sort of where my place was in the world, where we sat within the natural order, quote unquote, things like that, with classification and things. So that became sort of an early on obsession of mine. I found clay fairly early on. This little tiny picture is one I think I made in grade 2, actually, but I started taking ceramics classes when I was around 14, and I just completely fell in love with it. I included this slide because I think it's quite a funny progression from, grade 2 up until sort of graduating with my degree, and the picture seems to be a common theme here. So during my childhood, I did a lot of making, whether it was, sewing, making things outside with dirt and mud, things like that. And so I was always busy and doing something. During my time at ACAD, or the Alberta University of Arts, I'm still getting used to calling it that, I spent a lot of time trying to sort of layer up imagery on my pots, thinking about ceramics as having layers that have different transparencies. So for example, some having a little bit more agency over the final product, whereas other ones would sort of creep in at the end of the process and surprise me a little bit with how their role would end up being in the final piece. So again, looking back at those kind of scientific illustrations, but at this point as well, I was very interested in a lot of textiles. So I had begun trying to bring in those sort of patterns, things like that from quilts, as well as just overall surface design into the pots. This is a set of jars that I made as my final kind of piece in my 4th year. During my time at AUArts, I began doing a lot of atmospheric firing. I had a chance to work with Robin DuPont and Martina Landon to do some atmospheric firing, so some salt, soda, and wood firing. And what I really fell in love with specifically about soda firing was the way in which I would sort of put things into play on the pieces in terms of surface design. And then the kiln would collaborate in a way with me where I would have something planned and then the kiln would sort of put me in my place every once in a while and say, you know, that was cute that what you thought was going to happen, but we did this instead, right? So there was some agency being kind of shared with the kiln, which to me felt much more exciting. It was a lot less predictable. And that to me felt really exciting and really engaging. So I spent a lot of time thinking about soda fired pots. Since leaving AUArts, I have been continuing on with my soda firing practice. Really lucky to be able to rent the kiln at the Medelta International Residency in Medicine Hat. These are a couple of pitcher and cup sets that I made. The one on the left is actually a memorial piece where I included a client's father's ashes in the clay. So that was a really kind of special project. But I found it hard to stop with the soda firing. So that sort of continued on within my practice. I began looking at a lot of sewing clothing, to be honest, and quilting. And so thinking about taking those sort of ways that I would think about fiber, you know, how do you attach a sleeve to a shoulder, things like that. And how do I take that principle and attach a spout onto something that has wheel thrown sort of after the fact. And this also brought in a lot of motifs from quilts and stitching marks and things like that onto the actual pieces I was making. So already starting to try and cross boundaries a little bit there. I also became really fascinated with specific function in terms of making pots that are for one specific purpose. So for example, the one on the bottom left here is a plate designed to hold a single slice of cake so that when I would make, you know, have a cake in the fridge and people are sort of eating it one scoop at a time, you know, keeping it wedge shaped so that no one will know, but it, you know, it has a nicer container, I guess, than just the sort of saran wrap that I had been used to. So finding objects that are for a specific purpose and designing around that purpose seemed really engaging to me. For example, the leather handles that I have shown here sort of render some of these objects, you know, not dishwasher safe, not something you'd want to marinate a steak in because you can't clean it quite as effectively. So it narrows the scope of what you can and should use these pots for. This piece in particular, I wanted to bring in to show you. It is a prescription pill set. So it has 7 jars, one for every day of the week. And it became important to me to sort of reconcile a complicated relationship to taking medication, whether it be for physical health or for mental health. And so this to me sort of brought the act of taking that medication into something that was more celebratory almost. So rather than having it kind of hid away in a cupboard, it would allow me to celebrate the actual taking of a medication. So really trying to use what I was making to kind of help me from an emotional state, right? And to sort of help me reconcile with that, I guess. Along this time, where am I in my notes here? So around this time, I began having symptoms of endometriosis, which is actually a hormonal related chronic illness. So it presents itself most commonly as quite painful periods. And it's actually about 1 in 9 women, the stats are telling us now, who have endometriosis. but it is an incurable kind of disease. So I began having some symptoms around my cycle, heavy periods, things like that. And so I began trying to sort of do research around that. And I was, looking up how do I look after myself and how, what treatments are available. And I began really thinking about the motifs of sort of hormones and things like that in my relationship to my body, and a lot of tiny, tiny tampons on the pieces I was making. So one of the things that really became important in my work for me to sort of work through was this idea that a woman's wellness was put sort of second in modern medicine to her fertility. So a lot of treatments around endometriosis were sort of, we can do that, but not until, you can't have children anymore, because fertility seemed to be sort of the focus. As someone who was, sort of set in my way that I didn't want to have any children, it was really frustrating, I think, because there wasn't a lot of support, wasn't a lot of information out there for other narratives, right? And for other ways of sort of having this disease and looking after ourselves as an individual rather than just through the lens of fertility. This quilt in particular on the left was an attempt for myself to sort of reimagine the landscape of my body as being sort of mine and a place for me to exist in a medical system where I felt as though it was being sort of treated as more of a vessel. Around this time, I began thinking a lot about sort of nurturing and what it meant to nurture, and I became really fascinated with gardening. So I went into kind of a lot of thinking about specific function of pots in terms of watering cans and nurturing a garden, and how I sort of become a nurturing individual on my own terms. I'm gonna take a sip of tea here. So this was around the same time that I actually went in for surgery to treat my endometriosis. And a surgery is not a cure, but it is something to sort of hold the demons at bay, for lack of a better term. And so I spent a lot of time in the next few months in quilts, under quilts, around quilts. And so for me, this became a time where I was really sort of missing the ceramic studio, but I had access to a needle and thread, right? And so I began thinking a lot about how can I have a practice that exists that I can do from the couch, right? Because, knowing I'm feeling better, there's a chance I won't in the future, right? So I'm thinking a lot at the time about how my relationship with quilting could be something that sort of gets me through, the difficult times of having a chronic illness. I made a quilted coat, which to me felt like a nice way to sort of bring the comfort of the couch and the bed with me when I had to go out into the world, as well as a pitcher and basin set. I became really, I thought a lot about the relationship that we have to sort of the way that we talk maybe about our menstrual cycle within society. It's something that's sort of unclean, oftentimes thought of, and something that we shouldn't be talking about. So I wanted to think of a way to sort of wash that away, for lack of a better term. Within the quilting practice, I spent a lot of time working kind of with hand stitching on the couch. So these are a couple of examples of things I did during my recovery. And that skyrocketed me towards thinking about the quilts I was making in terms of layering similar to my ceramics. So I had done some screen printing when I was in school and thought, how can I take those screen printing techniques that I'm using on my pots back into my quilts? So here's some examples of some sort of early research there. And so making this relationship back and forth from, the drawn line on a pot could be, for example, the stitch line on a quilt, things like that. And so trying to transfer and sort of encourage both to inform the other, right? So this was all sort of pre the show. At this point, I just want to chat about a few pieces specifically within the show. This queen size quilt is called Still I Rise. And this was one that I began sort of drafting out the pieces as I was looking a lot at the bathroom floor, which sounds a little bit more dramatic than I think I meant it to. But when you're, in one room sort of confined and you're taking in all of the visual information, these patterns sort of stuck with me. And so I thought, how can I put my own pattern, my own spin, and sort of redecorate the things around me? And just, was able to sort of overcome that, heal, and reclaim some agency over my body. This one here is titled While I Still Have Time. And this was an exploration for me into sort of the anxiety that comes inherently with having a chronic illness and being well again. And this sort of anxiety that at any point I could not be well again, right? And so coming to terms with, I can't necessarily overwork myself all the time, even though I want to, in fear of, maybe tomorrow I won't be able to do this. So this was kind of a lot of things I was thinking about at the time and trying to play with the subtlety of certain layers. So there is, for example, a printed layer on top in kind of an orange that's difficult to see, I think, in this photo, that's sort of laying on top of all of the other patterns and making space for each other. This one here is the Golden Hour quilt. This was an attempt for me to sort of bring in some of my botanical threads from my pots into fiber. And these were all collections of sort of small dye projects I had done over the years and allowed me to bring in my natural dyeing process into the quilting. But also, I think a lot of these sort of ways of making prints and patterns on fabric are things that have led me to do more research onto those pots in particular. This piece here, I've titled Soft Bulk. These are ceramic tiles that are about 11 by 11, I want to say, which I created sort of multiples of and decorated much the same as I would my regular soda-fired pots. But I really wanted to play with the idea of each one being kind of a quilt block and whether or not the pattern itself would be the objects or the space between, right? I think it's really fascinating to sort of flip each one on their head. And so this was an attempt to do just that. My quilted coat that I included in the exhibition, I wanted to really play with a sense of overwhelm. A lot of my quilting practice happens a lot with sort of solid fabrics and how I play with the pattern especially. And this became sort of a representation for me of just overwhelm in terms of being well again, all of this sort of experience I had gone through. And so it was an attempt to sort of cover myself with the overwhelm and use that almost as a shield. This one here, Ritual Purification. So this was another sort of look into that pitcher and basin and really kind of come to terms with caring for myself and, cleaning myself, things like that. Taking care of my body in a way that became less of a chore and more of kind of a ritual. So I figured having a beautiful object to do that with could encourage and make it sort of more of a ceremony than a chore or something added that I had to do that day, right? So really trying to play with the way I'm looking at things more than anything. This is the final piece I have to show you, which is Levels of Yielding. This one I had hoped to sort of play with the prescription jars that I had shown you previously during my degree. But the idea here is that there are 3 different jars, which have 3 different kind of personalities with the knobs, because oftentimes when I am not well, what I tend to do is sort of almost play uncle with my pain in that if I take, an Advil, for example, if the pain gets worse, I can't necessarily take something stronger because they can't mix. So you end up sort of almost waiting for it to get worse in almost in anticipation, but then you kind of are playing this mental game with yourself, which I think only really makes sense when you're in it. And so it was a way for me to sort of explain to my partner, I'm not crazy. I don't know if it worked, but but it was sort of, you know, will I yield first, or will the pain, and I can go from there. So this is quite a personal piece, but I think for me, it was a way to kind of express that anxiety and to explain to the people around me who I think it's hard to see me not doing well, right? So this was a way to explore that, I guess. So that is all of the work I have prepped to show you. This last slide is just some images of mine of previous work, as well as my website and my Instagram. But before I stop sharing my screen, I wanted to just say thank you to everyone at the Crafts Council. You have been so wonderful, and I had so much fun at the opening, and everyone has been just so lovely and patient with me. So I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity, and thank you all for coming and hearing me speak.
Thank you, Lael. And I think I can speak for everyone at the Craft Council when I say you made it very easy. Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you in the gallery.
Thank you.
And once again, that show is up until June 24th. If you can make it to our Edmonton location to see the show, that would be great. Thanks so much, Lael, for talking to us tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us.